The first time I knew, really knew, that my life was about to be systematically dismantled by the man I once loved. It started with a sound. It wasn't a scream or a crash. It was the chipper, almost offensively cheerful chime of an incoming email on my laptop. It was 3 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, a day that had been, until that exact moment, shaping up to be one of the best since I'd struck out on my own. The sun was streaming into my small prep kitchen, which was really just the oversized galley in my Brooklyn apartment, and the air smelled of roasted garlic and rosemary. I had just finished plating up a tasting menu for a prospective client, a small law firm that wanted to start hosting quarterly partner dinners. The photos I'd taken for my portfolio looked incredible. I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time, professional pride, pure and simple. Then came the chime. The subject line read, "Cancellation of event, Sterling Financial." My stomach didn't just drop, it felt like it had been surgically removed. Sterling Financial was my anchor, the first big corporate client I'd landed for my fledgling catering business, Cara's Table. They had booked me for a 12-event series, a contract so significant it was the only reason I could afford the rent on my apartment and the commercial-grade oven that took up half the living space. I clicked it open, my hand trembling slightly. The email was brief, cold, and corporate. "Dear Miss Dubois," it began, which was a bad sign. "Marcus, my contact, always called me Cara. Due to recently surfaced concerns regarding the quality and safety standards of your operation, we are exercising the termination clause in our contract, effective immediately. We wish you the best in your future endeavors." Concerns, quality, and safety. I ran my kitchen with the precision of a surgeon. I was meticulous, obsessive even, about sourcing, sanitation, and execution. My entire business model was built on transparency and trust. What on earth were they talking about? I scrolled down, and my blood ran cold. Attached, without comment, was a link to a review page for my business. There was only one review, a single, brutal star. The words felt like a physical assault. The anonymous reviewer, hiding behind the username HonestEats88, had written a novel of pure venom. They claimed they had hired me for a private anniversary dinner, and that it was a catastrophe from start to finish. The canapés, they wrote, were soggy and tasted of the freezer. The main course, a slow-braised short rib I was particularly proud of, was described as a greasy brick of shoe leather swimming in a sauce that had the color and consistency of motor oil. They accused me of using cheap, low-grade ingredients while passing them off as artisanal. But the part that made my vision swim, the part that was clearly designed to be a kill shot, was the final paragraph. The worst part was the cross-contamination. My wife has a severe nut allergy, which we communicated clearly. We spent our anniversary night in the emergency room after she had an anaphylactic reaction to the dessert. This business is not just unprofessional, it's dangerous. It was a lie, a complete, total, and malicious fabrication. I had never catered an anniversary dinner for a couple where a nut allergy was a factor. I would remember. That's the kind of detail that gets seared into your brain. My safety protocols were ironclad precisely because of fears like that. This wasn't a disgruntled customer. This was a targeted assassination. My hands were shaking so badly, I had to grip the sides of my laptop. Who would do this? Who would invent something so monstrous, so potentially ruinous? And then I saw it. A single phrase buried in the middle of the poison pen screed. The reviewer complained that my supposed farm-to-table ethos was a joke, a hollow marketing gimmick for a chef who wouldn't know a heritage tomato if it fell on her head. And in that moment, the entire world snapped into focus with sickening clarity. There was only one person on the planet who would use that exact turn of phrase, that specific, condescending jab. It was a line Julian had thrown at me during our final explosive argument. Julian, my ex-boyfriend, the brilliant, charismatic, and deeply insecure chef who was now the toast of the New York food scene. The man who had taken the beautiful shared dream we built together and twisted it into a weapon to use against me. He hadn't just left a bad review. He had tried to bury me. It wasn't about revenge for leaving him. No, this was about erasure. He wanted to make sure that no part of the world we created together could exist without him in control of it. And as I sat there, the smell of garlic and rosemary suddenly nauseating, I made a promise to myself. He may have started this, but I was going to finish it. It wasn't about revenge until it was. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. The sterling financial cancellation was just the first domino to fall. Within 48 hours, 2 more of my regular clients had called to postpone their upcoming events, citing vague scheduling conflicts with a tone that suggested they were trying to spare my feelings. They had seen the review, of course they had. In the small, gossipy world of corporate event planning, a review that mentions an emergency room visit spreads like a wildfire. My business, which had been so carefully and painstakingly built over the past 8 months, was bleeding out on the sterile floor of the internet. I spent the next 3 days in a state of suspended animation, a zombie moving through the motions of a life that no longer felt real. I'd wake up, stare at the ceiling, and feel a crushing weight on my chest, a physical manifestation of the dread that was now my constant companion. I'd force myself to go into the kitchen, my beautiful, once joyful kitchen, and just stare at the silent, gleaming appliances. The passion was gone, replaced by a hollow ache. Everything I looked at reminded me of him, of us. The butcher block island was a custom piece we had picked out together at a salvage yard upstate, dreaming of the day we'd have a restaurant of our own. He'd sanded and oiled it himself, his hands, which could be so impossibly gentle with a delicate piece of fish or a fragile herb, working the wood with a craftsman's focus. Now the sight of it made me sick. Our dream had been so clear, so vibrant. We met at the Culinary Institute of America, 2 young, ambitious kids with more passion than sense. I was in the pastry program, he was in culinary arts. I was the quiet, methodical planner. He was the fiery, instinctive artist. We were a perfect balance. We fell in love over late-night study sessions, debating the merits of French versus Italian butter, and bonding over a shared disdain for the soulless, industrialized food system. Our shared vision was a restaurant that was more than just a place to eat. It would be an ode to the earth. We called it the narrative of the seasons. We would have our own garden, a deep and binding relationship with every farmer, every cheesemaker, every fisherman who supplied us. The menu would be a story, and every ingredient a character. It was his concept, he'd always say, but I was the one who gave it structure, who wrote the business plan, who spent weekends driving with him to the Hudson Valley, walking through muddy fields, and talking to grizzled old-world farmers about heirloom varietals. I was the one who built the scaffolding that his brilliant, chaotic creativity could climb. He was the star, but I was the firmament he shone against. Then came the success. He got a sous chef position at a Michelin-starred place in Manhattan, and the critics started to notice him. The praise went to his head like cheap wine. The passionate artist began to curdle into an arrogant tyrant. Our collaborative brainstorming sessions became lectures, with him pacing our tiny apartment, monologuing about his genius while I was expected to just nod and take notes. He stopped saying we, and started saying I. The farm-to-table concept he and I had nurtured together became my brand, my philosophy. He started talking about investors, about opening his own place, a sleek, minimalist temple to his talent in Soho. When I would try to interject, to remind him of our original, more rustic vision, he'd wave a dismissive hand. Cara, be realistic. You can't build a world-class restaurant on 5 acres of kale and a handshake with a guy named Stan. This is the big league. It's about perception. The final straw wasn't one big thing, but 1,000 tiny cuts. It was him forgetting to invite me to a dinner with potential investors. It was him introducing me at a party as my girlfriend. She helps me with the books. It was the way his eyes would glaze over when I talked about my own aspirations, my dream of a small, bespoke catering business, where I could control every detail and build a personal connection with my clients. To him it was a cute little hobby, a side project, while he was off building an empire. The love we had, the partnership, had been replaced by a hierarchy. I wasn't his partner anymore. I was his audience. So I left. I packed my knives, my cookbooks, and my heart, which felt like a bruised and shriveled piece of fruit, and I walked out. The breakup was uglier than I could have imagined. He didn't just let me go. He tried to scorch the earth behind me. He accused me of being jealous, of being small-minded, of trying to hold him back. The fight culminated in him screaming, his face red and contorted with a rage I'd never seen before. "You think your little cupcake business can compete? You're a glorified home cook. You wouldn't know a real heritage tomato if it fell on your head." 6 months later, he opened Aura. It was an instant sensation. The decor was cold and pretentious, all concrete and glass, but the critics raved. They fawned over Julian's uncompromising commitment to local sourcing, his deeply personal connection to the land. They wrote about his weekly trips to the Union Square Green Market, about the exclusive partnerships he had with small, family-run farms. It was our dream, repackaged and sold as his solitary genius. Every glowing review felt like a fresh betrayal. I tried to be the bigger person. I focused on my own work, pouring every ounce of my energy and savings into Cara's table. I was starting to gain traction, to build a reputation for quality and creativity. I was starting to heal. And then came the review, the digital age Molotov cocktail designed to burn my new life to the ground. That lie about the nut allergy was the part that truly showcased his cruelty. He knew my mother had a severe allergy. He had seen me, dozens of times, meticulously sterilizing my equipment, using separate cutting boards, being almost pathologically careful, because I had grown up with the fear of what a single stray peanut could do. To use that specific, intimate knowledge of my life as a weapon was a new level of monstrous. On the 4th day, after another sleepless night, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. I almost ignored it, assuming it was another client calling to cancel. But something made me answer. "Is this Cara Dubois?" A crisp, professional voice asked. "Yes, this is she," I mumbled, my voice hoarse. "This is Anya Sharma, assistant to Evelyn Vance. Miss Vance received your tasting menu and was exceptionally impressed." I blinked. Evelyn Vance. She wasn't just the chief food critic for the New York Times. She was a kingmaker, an institution. Her reviews could launch a restaurant into the stratosphere or condemn it to oblivion. A few weeks prior, in a fit of what I now saw as delusional optimism, I had sent a cold call pitch to her office, along with a sampling of my menu, hoping to get my business on her radar for a potential feature on up-and-coming caterers. I had assumed it had gone straight into a bin. "She was," I whispered, not daring to believe it. "Very," Anya said. "She'd like to hire you. It's for a small private dinner party she's hosting at her home in 2 weeks. A test run of sorts. She said to tell you that your choux pastry was, and I quote, a minor miracle of engineering." The words hit me like a defibrillator. A jolt of pure, unadulterated hope. It was more than a job. It was a lifeline. It was validation from the highest possible authority, a voice of reason cutting through the noise of Julian's lies. A single sentence from Evelyn Vance was worth more than 1,000 anonymous, venomous reviews. "Yes," I said, my voice suddenly clear and firm. "Yes, absolutely. I'm available." We discussed the details, the date, the number of guests, the fee, as we were about to hang up. A thought, cold and sharp, and fully formed, pierced through the fog of my despair. It was an idea so audacious, so risky, that it took my breath away. It was a plan born of desperation and a sudden, surging sense of righteous fury. The universe had just handed me a weapon, and I'll be damned if I wasn't going to use it. Anya, one more thing, I said, my heart starting to pound a new dangerous rhythm. I know Miss Vance is always looking for the next big thing. There's a restaurant she absolutely has to review. It's called Aura. The decision to weaponize Evelyn Vance was not one I made lightly. For a full day after that phone call, I was racked with a profound sense of moral whiplash. One moment, I felt a giddy, almost savage sense of empowerment. The next I was drowning in a sea of doubt. Was this who I was now? A person who schemed and plotted, who used people as pawns in a game of personal vengeance. The old Cara, the one who believed in karma and letting your work speak for itself, would have been horrified. But the old Cara had been naive. The old Cara had been a doormat. The old Cara had her heart and her business stomped on by a man who mistook her kindness for weakness. She was gone. Or at least, she was in hibernation. The new Cara, the one forged in the fire of Julian's betrayal, was a pragmatist. It wasn't just about getting back at him anymore. This was about survival. His review wasn't a critique, it was a declaration of war. He had used a public platform to lie, to defame me, and to try to destroy my livelihood. All I was going to do was facilitate the truth. The irony was almost poetic. He had built his entire reputation, his whole glittering empire, on the lie of authenticity. He preached the gospel of farm to table, while I suspected, secretly sinning with corporate suppliers. If I could prove it, it wouldn't be revenge, it would be justice. The narrative I kept repeating to myself was simple. He threw the first stone, but I'm going to make sure it boomerangs back and shatters his glass house. My first challenge was confirming my suspicion. I knew Julian had become lazy and arrogant, but was he arrogant enough to commit the cardinal sin of his own religion? Was he really using a mass-market supplier like Sysco or U.S. Foods for a restaurant that charged $300 a head for a tasting menu? The kind of place where the menu listed the first name of the farmer who grew the carrots. It seemed almost too brazen to be true. But I knew Julian. I knew his obsession with profit margins and his deep-seated contempt for what he privately called the performance art of sourcing. He loved the idea of the farmer, but he hated the inconvenience of the farm. I needed proof. Hard, undeniable proof. I couldn't just whisper a rumor in Evelyn Vance's ear. She was a journalist. She dealt in facts. An anonymous tip might pique her interest, but concrete evidence would make it her mission. But how could I get it? I couldn't exactly stroll into Aura's loading bay and start taking pictures. That's when I thought of Leo. Leo Martinez was Julian's sous chef. He was a quiet, intensely serious chef from Queens, with a talent that was nearly the equal of Julian's, but with none of the ego. We had become friends during my time with Julian, bonding over a shared love for old-school French technique and a mutual frustration with Julian's increasingly erratic behavior. Leo was a purist. He believed in the craft. He'd once spent an entire week perfecting a single sauce, long after Julian had lost interest and moved on to designing the new uniforms. If anyone would be disgusted by a bait and switch of this magnitude, it would be Leo. The problem was, we hadn't spoken since the breakup. I had cut off all contact with our mutual friends, needing a clean break. Reaching out to him now would be risky. He was still loyal to Julian, as far as I knew. He depended on him for his job. Why would he help me? I debated for hours, drafting and deleting text messages. Finally, I settled on something simple and non-committal. Hey Leo, it's Cara. It's been a while, hope you're well. I was hoping to ask you a quick professional question. Any chance you're free for a coffee this week? He responded almost immediately. Cara, wow, good to hear from you. Yeah, of course. Tomorrow morning work, my usual spot before service. We met at a tiny no-frills coffee shop in the East Village, a place we used to go to escape Julian's monologues. Leo looked tired. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his chef's whites, visible under his jacket, looked rumpled. It's good to see you, he said, giving me a small, weary smile. How have you been? I heard you started your own thing. That's amazing. I'm trying, I said, deciding to be direct. Actually, that's sort of why I wanted to talk to you. I'm having a bit of a reputation problem. I told him about the review. I didn't mention I suspected Julian. I just laid out the anonymous attack, the specific fabricated details, and the damage it was causing. As I spoke, I saw his expression shift from sympathy to a kind of weary recognition. He sighed and rubbed his eyes. Cara, I'm so sorry, he said, his voice low. That's awful. And I wish I could say I was surprised. My heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? He hesitated, looking around the coffee shop as if to make sure no one was listening. Things have gotten weird at Aura. The pressure is insane. Julian's on edge all the time. He's obsessed with the bottom line, cutting corners everywhere. The exclusive farm partnerships, most of them are for show. We get one, maybe 2 deliveries a week from them, mostly for the stuff he can photograph for Instagram. The heritage carrots, the microgreens, the pretty stuff, and the rest? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Leo let out a long, slow breath, the sound of a man who was tired of holding a secret. The rest? The bulk of it? The chicken, the beef, the cooking oil, the flour, half the damn vegetables. It comes off a big white truck, twice a week before the sun comes up, a truck that says Sysco on the side. The confirmation hit me with a strange mix of vindication and profound sadness. It was true. The entire temple was built on a lie. He's a fraud, I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. He's a businessman, Leo corrected, though there was no admiration in his tone. He says it's what you have to do to survive at this level, that nobody can tell the difference anyway. He calls it strategic sourcing. He shook his head in disgust. I've been thinking about leaving for months. This isn't what I signed up for. I'm a chef, not a marketing manager. I got into this to cook, to make beautiful food. Now I spend half my day figuring out how to make a frozen pre-portioned piece of cod look like it was hand-line caught this morning. An idea began to form in my mind, a way to make this work for both of us. Leo, I said, leaning forward. What if you could get proof of that? Invoices, delivery manifests, photos of the truck at the loading dock? He looked at me, his eyes widening as he started to understand what I was asking. Cara, what are you planning to do? I'm planning to survive, I said. He tried to ruin my business with a lie. I'm going to save it with the truth, his truth. I took a deep breath. I have a client, a very, very important client. Someone who could shine a very bright light on Aura's strategic sourcing, but I need proof. Something undeniable. I could see the conflict in his face, the fear of getting caught, of losing his job, warring with his own professional integrity. He was a good man, caught in a bad situation. Why should I help you? He asked, though it sounded less like a challenge and more like he was asking me to convince him it was the right thing to do. Because you know it's wrong, I said softly. Because you're better than this. And because when this all comes out, and trust me, it will, you want to be on the right side of it. Julian is building a house of cards, Leo. You don't want to be inside when it collapses. I paused, then added the final piece. And when you're ready to leave, I'll help you find a new position. I'm starting to get connected. I know people who value real chefs. He was silent for a long time, staring into his coffee cup. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. Finally, he looked up at me, and in his eyes, I saw the flicker of rebellion I had been hoping for. The main Sysco delivery is on Thursday, he said, his voice barely audible. 5 a.m. The loading dock in the alley behind the restaurant. I can't take photos myself. I'll be on the line. But the invoices, they come to my station for inventory check-in. I could misplace one. That's all I need, I said, a wave of relief washing over me. One invoice, and Leo, thank you. Don't thank me yet, he said, his expression grim. This is going to get messy. 2 days later, on a Thursday morning so early, it still felt like the middle of the night, I was huddled in a doorway across the street from Aura's back alley. The air was cold and damp, smelling of garbage and stale beer. I felt like a spy in a bad movie, my heart pounding with a mixture of adrenaline and fear. At exactly 5:03 a.m., it happened. A massive refrigerated truck, utterly generic except for the bold blue Sysco logo on its side, backed slowly into the narrow alley, its reverse beeper cutting through the pre-dawn silence. The back door of the restaurant opened, and two of the kitchen porters came out, their breath pluming in the cold air. They started unloading box after box of produce, meat and dry goods. There was no farmer named Stan in sight. This was the cold, hard reality of industrial food service. I lifted my phone, my fingers numb, and started taking pictures. The logo on the truck, the boxes being carried into the kitchen of New York's most celebrated farm-to-table restaurant. I took 20 photos, all of them clear, damning, and irrefutable. I had my visual confirmation. Later that day, I met Leo again, this time in a crowded park. He looked even more stressed than before. Without a word, he slipped a folded piece of paper into my hand. It was a multi-page invoice from Sysco, dated for that day's delivery. I scanned the items: frozen shrimp, 20 pounds, chicken breast, boneless, skinless, 40 pounds, prime rib roast, 15 pounds, salad mix, spring blend, 10 pounds. It was a list of everything Julian had built his reputation on denouncing. It was the smoking gun. "This is perfect," I breathed. "I quit today," Leo said, not looking at me. Told him I got a better offer. He didn't even try to stop me, just grunted and told me to be out by the end of my shift. He finally met my gaze, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief and sorrow. "It's a shame. It could have been something special. It still can be," I told him. "Just not with him." That evening, I began to assemble the package for Evelyn Vance. I printed the best of the photos I had taken. I made a high-quality copy of the Sysco invoice. I wrote a short, anonymous, typewritten note. It read, "Miss Vance, you are a seeker of truth in a world of culinary illusion. The story at Aura is the illusion, not the truth. Ask them where the food really comes from. The enclosed might help you start." I didn't sign it. I didn't need to. I put everything into a plain manila envelope, addressed it to her at the New York Times building, and put 3 times the necessary postage on it just to be safe. I walked 10 blocks from my apartment to a mailbox I never used and slipped it inside. The clank of the metal flap closing sounded like the cocking of a pistol. The first move had been made. There was no going back now. All I could do was wait for the silence to be broken. The 2 weeks leading up to my dinner for Evelyn Vance were a masterclass in controlled schizophrenia. By day, I was a whirlwind of focused energy, meticulously planning her menu. I was determined to create a meal so personal, so flawlessly executed, that it would not only secure my future, but also serve as a stark, unspoken contrast to the fraudulent feast being served nightly at Aura. My concept was a Brooklyn garden in autumn. Every single ingredient was sourced from a vendor I could name, from a farm I had visited. I drove out to Long Island to meet a woman who grew the most exquisite jewel-toned fingerling potatoes. I found a guy in the Catskills who made a goat cheese so creamy and tangy, it made me want to weep. My apartment became a laboratory of authentic flavors. This dinner wasn't just a job, it was my manifesto. By night, however, I was a nervous wreck. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Had the package arrived? Did she even open it? Did she dismiss it as the ramblings of a lunatic or a disgruntled ex-employee? Every time my phone buzzed with an unknown number, my heart would leap into my throat, convinced it was Julian, or worse, a lawyer. I obsessively scrolled through social media, looking for any ripple effect. I scanned the online reservation system for Aura, looking for a sudden drop-off, but there was nothing. The machine, for now, was still running smoothly. The silence from Julian was the most unnerving part. I had half expected a furious, accusatory phone call, but there was nothing. It was possible he still had no idea I was connected to any of this. His own monumental ego was my greatest shield. He would never imagine that the glorified home cook he'd dismissed so contemptuously could orchestrate such a sophisticated attack. He'd probably blame a rival chef or a bitter former investor. The thought was grimly satisfying. Then, a week before the dinner party, the first tremor occurred. I got a call from Leo. "It's starting," he said, his voice a low, excited hum. "The food blogger, the one from Gotham Bites. He was in for a review last night. He asked Julian, right to his face, about his relationship with his farmers. He said he'd heard rumors about supply chain issues." My breath caught in my chest. What did Julian do? He handled it, I guess. Laughed it off. Said something about how success breeds jealousy and lies. He gave the blogger the whole song and dance, even comped his meal. But I could tell he was rattled. After the blogger left, Julian went into his office, and I heard him smash something against the wall. The news was a jolt of electricity. The package had landed. Evelyn Vance wasn't acting on it herself. Not yet. She was too smart for that. She was using her network, putting out feelers, sending her proxies to poke the bear and see how it reacted. She was letting the rumor mill do her dirty work for her, softening the target before the main assault. It was brilliant. The day of the dinner party arrived. I was a bundle of perfectly organized nerves. My prep was done, my ingredients were pristine, and my timeline was mapped out to the minute. I arrived at Evelyn Vance's stunning brownstone in Park Slope and was led by her assistant Anya to a kitchen that was larger than my entire apartment. Evelyn herself came in a few minutes later. She was smaller than I'd imagined from her author photos, a petite woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense aura that was both intimidating and deeply reassuring. "Cara," she said, extending a hand. "It's a pleasure. The kitchen is yours. Let me know if you need anything at all." "Thank you, Miss Vance," I said. "It's an honor to be here. Please, call me Evelyn, and the honor is all mine. I haven't been this excited about a meal in a long time." Her eyes twinkled. "Your reputation, it seems, is beginning to precede you." I wasn't sure if she was referring to my cooking or the whispers I had started, and I decided it was better not to ask. The dinner was for 8 people, a mix of artists, writers, and what I guessed were a few of her trusted editors. I worked in a state of intense, blissful focus. Every plate was a small canvas. The roasted squash soup, with sage-infused brown butter. The seared scallops on a bed of parsnip puree. The main course, a duck confit I had spent 3 days preparing, with a cherry reduction sauce, and those perfect fingerling potatoes. For dessert, the minor miracle of engineering a pear and almond cream-filled choux pastry with a delicate spun sugar nest. As I was plating the dessert, Evelyn came back into the kitchen. Her guests were laughing in the other room, the low, happy murmur of a successful dinner party. "Cara, this has been, without exaggeration, one of the most exquisite meals I have had all year," she said, her voice soft but firm. "The story you told with this food, it was clear, honest, and beautiful. Thank you, Evelyn. That means the world to me." She leaned against the counter, her expression turning from appreciative diner to shrewd journalist. "You know," she said casually, "it's funny. I've been hearing so many stories lately, a lot of talk about a certain hotshot chef in Soho." I held my breath, focusing on arranging a sliver of candied pear. "A friend of mine, another writer, went to his restaurant, Aura, the other night," she continued, her eyes fixed on me. "He asked about the sourcing. The chef got very defensive, very theatrical." She paused. "I also received a rather interesting piece of mail a couple of weeks ago, an anonymous tip, with pictures. I didn't look up, my heart was a drum against my ribs. It suggested the entire farm-to-table concept. There might be more fiction than fact," she said. "Ordinarily, I dismiss things like that. The culinary world is rife with petty jealousies. But this one felt different. It was specific. It had documentation. She picked up one of my leftover pastry shells and examined it like a jeweler inspecting a gem. A lie of that magnitude, if it's true, that's not just bad cooking, it's a betrayal of the public trust. It's a story that needs to be told. I finally met her gaze. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. We both knew what was happening. I had provided the ammunition. She was providing the cannon. I think, she said, setting the pastry down, that it's time I made a reservation at Aura. The panic started subtly at first. It was a change in Julian's social media presence. His usual feed of smug, artfully lit photos of microgreens and his own self-satisfied face was replaced by a strange silence, then by a series of defensive, almost frantic posts. He posted a long, rambling screed about the haters and leeches who try to tear down success. He posted a blurry selfie with a farmer at the green market, a man who looked vaguely uncomfortable, with a caption that screamed of desperation. Still here, still real, #farm toteable, #real food, #know your farmer. It was so out of character, so transparently reactive, that it was like watching a man shout into the wind that he wasn't drowning. The real sign that the silent takeover was working came a few days later. My phone rang, and the caller ID was a number I had deleted, but would never forget. It was Julian. I let it go to voicemail. My hands were shaking. He called back immediately. I let it go to voicemail again. A minute later, a text message appeared. "Cara, I know you're there. Pick up the phone. We need to talk." My thumbs hovered over the screen. The old me would have answered, would have been drawn back into the vortex of his drama. The new me took a deep breath, typed a simple, devastatingly neutral response, and hit send. "I don't think we have anything to talk about." His reply was instantaneous, a rapid-fire burst of texts that reeked of panic. "What did you do? Was it you? Are you the one spreading these lies about me? My reputation, my restaurant, people are starting to ask questions. This has your fingerprints all over it. This vindictive little sabotage campaign. Answer me, Cara." I read the messages, and instead of fear, I felt a strange, cold calm. He was spiraling. The king was feeling his castle walls begin to tremble. I didn't respond. My silence was a more powerful weapon than any words I could have used. It was a mirror, reflecting his own paranoia back at him. He didn't know what I knew. He didn't know about Evelyn Vance. He just knew that the narrative he had so carefully controlled was slipping from his grasp. 2 days after that, Leo called me again. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "Evelyn Vance's office called for a reservation. For 2 this Friday." Under a different name, of course, but the restaurant manager recognized the assistant's voice. "The whole kitchen is in a full-blown meltdown." "What's the plan?" I asked, a thrill running through me. "The plan is chaos," Leo said with a dark laugh. "Julian is trying to do the impossible. He's trying to create a completely authentic, 100% locally sourced farm-to-table meal in 3 days. He's calling every farmer he's ever ghosted, begging for product. He's trying to rewrite the entire menu. He's screaming at everyone. People are ready to walk. And that's when the next phase of my plan, the one I hadn't even fully articulated to myself, slotted into place. It was time for the exodus. Julian's power wasn't just in his name, it was in the talented team he had assembled, the team he took for granted. It was time for his family to leave him. I spent the next 2 days on the phone. I called every contact I had in the restaurant industry. I called the head chefs at the places I respected, the ones who valued integrity. I told them about Leo Martinez, a brilliant sous chef looking for a new home. I told them about Aura's pastry chef, a young woman named Isabel who was a genius with chocolate but was tired of working with frozen puree. I told them about the 2 most experienced line cooks, the backbone of Julian's kitchen. I didn't tell them the whole story, just that a great team was about to be on the market. On Thursday, the day before Evelyn Vance's scheduled dinner, it happened. Leo called me, his voice giddy. "We did it," he said. I went in first and gave my 2 weeks' notice, effective immediately. Julian just sneered at me. Then Isabel went in. Then Marcus and David, the line cooks. We all did it within the same hour. By noon, he had lost his entire senior kitchen staff. He was left with a handful of terrified interns and the dishwashers. The image was glorious. Julian, the great conductor, standing in his silent kitchen, his entire orchestra having packed up their instruments and walked out on the eve of the most important performance of his life. He was alone with his lies and a walk-in freezer full of Sysco boxes he couldn't possibly serve to the most powerful food critic in the country. His final desperate attempt at manipulation came that evening. There was a knock on my apartment door, a frantic, insistent pounding. I looked through the peephole, and my blood froze. It was Julian. He looked terrible. His hair was a mess, his eyes were wild, and his expensive designer jacket was wrinkled. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out from the inside. "Cara, I know you're in there. Open the door," he yelled, his voice cracking. I stood there, my back pressed against the door, my heart hammering. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. "Please, Cara," his voice changed, shifting from rage to a desperate, wheedling plea. "Please, we need to talk. I know I messed up. The review, it was a stupid, horrible thing to do. I was angry. I missed you. I can fix this. I can fix everything. Just help me. Help me get through tomorrow night. I'll do anything." It was the classic Julian maneuver, the cycle of abuse, condensed into a single monologue. Rage, followed by feigned remorse, followed by a demand for help. He wasn't sorry for what he did. He was sorry he was about to get caught. He didn't miss me. He missed the support system I represented, the unpaid labor, the emotional validation, the strategic mind he had taken for granted. "Just this one thing, Cara," he begged, his voice muffled through the wood. "For old time's sake. I'm ruined if I can't pull this off." I closed my eyes, took a slow, deep breath, and thought about the sleepless nights, the canceled contracts, the fabricated story about a nut allergy. I thought about Leo's weary face and the passion that had been beaten out of him. I thought about the beautiful shared dream that he had stolen and monetized. It wasn't about old times. It was about the new reality. I stayed silent. After another minute of pleading, then a string of curses, I heard his footsteps retreat down the hall. The power had shifted completely. He wasn't the chef king in his castle anymore. He was just a man, alone in the dark, with no one left to blame but himself. The silent takeover was complete. Now all that was left was the public execution. The review was published online a week later, on a Tuesday morning. It landed with the force of an earthquake. The headline alone was a work of art, a masterpiece of journalistic assassination, or a soulless experience. Evelyn Vance didn't just critique the food, she dismantled the entire myth of Julian. She never once mentioned Sysco by name. She was far too elegant for that. Instead, she used 1,000 tiny cuts to let the restaurant bleed out. She wrote about the food she was served on her visit, a disastrous, hastily assembled meal that was clearly the work of a panicked and depleted kitchen. She described a ghost of a cassolette that tasted as if it had been conceived by a committee and executed by a ghost. She noted the curiously uniform shape of the vegetables, the weary, traveled texture of the fish, the perplexing lack of soul in a place that sells itself on its deep connection to the earth. But the most devastating part was the final third of the review, where she turned her attention to the concept itself. "The great sin of Aura," she wrote, "is not that the food is mediocre, it is that the restaurant is a liar. It cynically co-opts the language of integrity, of farms, of seasons, of artisans, to sell a product that is utterly devoid of it. It is a marketing concept in search of a chef, a brand in search of a soul. The farm-to-table movement, at its best, is a promise of honesty between the person who grows the food, the person who cooks the food, and the person who eats it. Aura breaks that promise at every turn. It is a restaurant built not on a foundation of soil, but of sand. She gave it 0 stars. Not 1. 0. In the world of the New York Times, that wasn't just a bad review, it was an obituary. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. Social media exploded. The story was picked up by every food blog, every industry magazine. The comment sections were a bloodbath. Within 48 hours, Aura's reservation system was shut down. A week after that, a sign appeared in the window, closed for renovations. Everyone knew it would never reopen. The lie was too big, the public humiliation too complete. I didn't feel the giddy triumph I thought I would. Instead, I felt a strange, quiet sense of peace. It was the feeling of a fever breaking. The injustice had been named, the balance restored. My own business, in the meantime, was flourishing. Evelyn had given Cara's Table a glowing mention in a separate Sunday column about the rising stars of private dining, praising my fierce commitment to honesty on the plate. My phone didn't stop ringing. I had to hire an assistant. I was interviewing for a junior chef to help me in the kitchen. I had a few good candidates, starting with a guy named Leo. The final confrontation, when it came, was not at all what I had expected. It wasn't a dramatic, screaming match. It happened 3 months later, in the most mundane of places, the dairy aisle of a Whole Foods in Gowanus. I was looking at artisanal yogurts, and I heard a voice behind me say my name, Cara. I turned. It was Julian. I almost didn't recognize him. The swagger was gone. The carefully constructed arrogance had crumbled, leaving behind someone who looked smaller, older, and deeply tired. He was wearing a rumpled hoodie and jeans. He looked normal. "Julian," I said, my voice even. I just wanted to say," he stammered, unable to meet my eyes. He looked at the Greek yogurt, at the floor, at his own shoes. "You won." "This was never a game, Julian," I said, and the words were true. It was my life, my business. "You tried to destroy it." "I know," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "It was a despicable thing to do. I was in a bad place. I was angry, and I was a coward, and I wanted to hurt you because I was hurting." He finally looked at me, and his eyes were glistening. "For what it's worth, I am truly sorry. For that, and for everything." I looked at him, the man I had once loved, the man who had created a universe with me, and then tried to banish me from it. I saw the wreckage he had made of his life, and I felt a flicker of something, not pity, but a kind of sad final closure. He wasn't a monster anymore. He was just a man who had been given a gift, and had squandered it because his ego was bigger than his talent. "I know you are," I said, and I think in that moment he actually was. "What you did," he started, shaking his head. "It was brutal, but it was genius. The anonymous tip, the staff walking out the day before the review. You took apart my entire life without ever raising your voice. You built a house of cards, Julian," I said, turning back to the yogurts. "All I did was open a window. I picked out my yogurt, put it in my basket, and walked away without looking back. There was nothing more to say. His new reality was his to live in. Mine was waiting for me, full of flavor and truth, and the quiet, beautiful satisfaction of work well done. The charade was over. So, that's the story. It's crazy to look back on it all now. My little business, Cara's Table, is more successful than I ever could have dreamed. I have my own dedicated commercial kitchen now. No more hauling equipment up my apartment stairs, and a small, incredible team that I trust with my life. We even have our own little rooftop garden, where we grow our own herbs. It's not the empire Julian wanted, but it's real, and it's mine. The question I get asked sometimes, by the few friends who know the whole story, is whether I regret it, whether I think the revenge was too harsh, and I've thought about that a lot. Was it proportional? Did he deserve to lose everything? I don't know. That's something you can debate in the comments. I'd actually love to know what you think. Did I go too far, or was it exactly what he deserved? Here's what I do know. It was never just about the bad review. It was about a pattern. It was about him stealing a shared dream, and trying to erase my part in it. It was about him trying to destroy my future because he couldn't control it. My actions weren't really about destroying him. They were about clearing a path for myself, a path that he was determined to block. He built his success on a lie, and lies, especially in the world of food, have a way of rotting from the inside out. I just helped the process along. It wasn't about revenge, but in the end, the justice felt pretty sweet. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you've ever had to fight for your own dream against someone who tried to tear you down, I see you. Don't forget to like this video if you found it satisfying, and subscribe to the channel for more stories about getting what you deserve. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next one. See you next time.